Thank you very much, Susanna, for the introduction, and thank you for already giving my paper. There is absolutely no need for me to be here now, although I am very glad I am. I'd like to thank everyone for the invitation. So Susanne, Nina, both Annas, Caroline, and Barbara. So many thanks to all of you. Thanks also to the artists. And as a mark of not simply my gratitude at being here, but also my willingness to participate in it. The work I'm doing just now stems exactly from the work I did last time I was here in January. So that really is a tribute to the success of the program that is designed to bring philosophers and artists together, and I think that's tremendously, obviously successful. So, I want to talk about the end of nature. In fact, I want to announce the end of nature. My question is, where am I going to do that? So if I'm going to announce the end of nature, is this in the manner of a prognostication? Am I making a prophecy? Can I announce the end of nature as a past event? Is there a present in which the end of nature occurs such that I can announce it in it? If any of these things obtain, then the end of nature, that is to say, an after nature which is simply after nature, is conceivable. If not, it is not. Now, why is this important? It's important for several reasons, one of which is a conviction which I'm going to call Physioside, or the murder of nature, amongst philosophers in particular, concerning the end of nature having already taken place. One particular perverse mode of this is by a character called John McDowell. He accounts second nature to be entirely a space of reasons. This space of reasons has no location other than in a space of reasons. He calls this second nature, inviting the question, if this is second nature, what then is first nature? First nature, for McDowell, is precisely that nature that issues from the best of our natural sciences. The best of our natural sciences tell us, in other words, what nature is. This means that nature is now divided into two parts. One, a second nature, two, a first nature, neither of which is nature. Both of them are creatures of the space of reasons. So the space of reasons is autonomous, and its existence is crucially dependent on that no nature exists. So the announcement of the end of nature has in fact already occurred, but the issue of where it occurs from is unsolved. So I want to see why this is. I called this contribution to Physioside. This is not a new phenomenon. It is roughly 400 years old that philosophers have been trying to murder nature. They do it in a variety of ways. The one I want to concentrate on today is quite simply the rational murder of nature. It's replacement or supplanting with something which is not nature, an X after nature. Now, this X after nature, I'm going to claim, is itself nature. Therefore, nature after nature is a permanent state of affairs. It's ubiquitous. However, if we put this together with my claim that I'm going to announce the end of the universe, we get a claim which is both ubiquitous, nature after nature, and impossible. From where can the claim about the end of nature be made? So if I can't find a space in nature to make the claim concerning the end of nature, it entails that the end of nature is both impossible and ubiquitous. And that is straightforwardly a contradiction. That straightforward contradiction is the material with which I'm going to work. Now, to start, I want to demonstrate that there is no need to think about Physioside as a philosophical imperative. We often think, and this I had occasion to mention some time ago, we often think that, in fact, a species of philosophy born with Plato at the very dawn of the subject consists in the separation of two worlds. One, a world of ideas, which is paradigmatically not nature. The other, a world of things, moreover, that are not permanent things, but that are becoming things. A series of becomings which, by their nature, are never complete. And Plato makes this point by saying that, by asking the following riddle. It's almost like Gollum in the cave, okay? The riddle is this: what is it that always is and never becomes? And what always becomes but never is? The key thing there is the positing not of the difference, but of the identity between the two. Or rather, there is an eternity in ideas, an eternity in what is, and an eternity in becoming. The becoming is as eternal as the being. Now this leads to the following question. Why is it that we ever thought that Plato abolished the physical world, i.e., how did it come about that the true world, as Nietzsche says, became a fable? It became a fable, I'm going to claim, because of Nietzscheanity. That is, precisely because Nietzsche claimed this to be the case, and we hold it as an article of faith that it has in fact happened. However, if we turn to Plato's own reports of his development, we find the following claim. When I was young, Thebes, says Socrates, I studied natural history. Now I want to know what are the causes of things. In this search for causes of things, Plato finds the following claim. It's by Anaxagoras. Everything is mind. Mind is the cause of things. Already we have a species of Macdowellian second nature, a space of reasons which consists in a causal operation. Mind is the cause of all things means that there is no distance, if you like, between the mind that thinks or the mind that minds and the nature that natures. In other words, mind is purely causal. How then did the two worlds arise? Certainly not in Plato. Moreover, this leads to a later account of what it is that is true being, according to Plato, one that we find in his dialogue, The Sophist, which is one of the strangest books ever written. Not quite as strange as the Parmenides, but it does feature that great fantasy episode, The Battle of Gods and Giants. And I fail to see why that wouldn't be of interest to everyone. A battle of gods and giants. Who knew that such a thing took place? At the end of that battle, Socrates is told the following conclusion by the Eleatic stranger. I hold it as a mark of being that whatever is power. Now, let's take this. We can align this with the idea that mind is causal. In other words, that nature and mind are intimately connected. We can also align it, therefore, with natural history, because what is natural history other than tracing the history of nature? That history of nature is only completed when nature can be seen to emerge from what it is not. In other words, not being must be the consequence of an investigation into natural history. We must find an origin of nature only if it is the case that nature at some point did not obtain, that there was some not nature at some point. So that would be natural history. What does he find, however? He doesn't find not being. He finds mind that is causal with respect to being. In other words, the root of all nature lies in mind. It's a strange and perverse claim, and yet one, I think, that is ubiquitous equally amongst philosophers, amongst artists, amongst humanists, that is, students of the Geisteswissenschaften in general. And the claim is this: it is not because there is being that there is thinking, but rather because there is thinking that there is being. Mind is the causal nexus from which nature emerges. So this is a species of natural history. However, the powers account that starts in the Sophist yields the following set of problems. Firstly, consider what a power is. A power is a power only if it is resisted by another. If that were not the case, we would be dealing with a power which is non-finite. A power which is not limited, in other words, by its products. If we imagine a power unlimited by any product, what is it that that power does? The only answer is absolutely nothing. So a power that does absolutely nothing raises the question, is it a power at all? In other words, to posit power entails that there is at least more than one power. There is no single power. This is why, for example, the idea that there is some finality in, let's say, a Lebenskraft, some finality in a force that has a specific result, is moot from the get-go, quite simply because if the force or power is coincident with its product, then in fact no power has taken place, no force has been exerted. There must therefore be several forces, at the very least. There must be several forces. I'm going to claim, in fact, that there must be an infinite amount of forces just if there are finite products. Since if there were not an infinite amount of forces, then it could not be the case that finite products would arise at all. The reason being the following. If we think of a finite quantity of forces, what makes them finite? They have, if you will, a species of exhaustion. They reach a level where they have been wholly converted into things that are. This is otherwise known as the principle of sufficient reason. It's simply the case that because there are such powers as exist that have these objects as their consequence, then these powers consist in their full actuality only when exhausted in the objects they produce. So it cannot be the case, if there are powers, and there ever have been, that those powers are exhausted in their objects. In other words, objects are not coincident with being. Objects are not coincident with power. If that were the case, there would be no need for an hypothesis of powers, there would just be objects. And moreover, it would be an eternal domain of objects. Okay, so we've reached the following conclusion, that if there is power at all, there must be more than one. And there's an additional hypothesis, that, namely, powers are non-finite. Were powers not non-finite, that is, if they were finite, then they would consist of their exhaustion in their product, which makes a nonsense of the account of powers at all. So all of this derives from Plato. Well, how near does this get us being able to announce the end of the universe? Imagine that there is a universe in which one episode occurs wherein the end of that universe takes place. Has the end of the universe occurred? In one respect, yes, it has. The end of the universe occurs just in that location where the end of the universe has taken place. But then the question arises, has the universe ended? Well, yes, just in that place, but not at all in respect of the universe as such. That is to say, there exist more places which are not, if you will, filled or saturated by the end of the universe than are saturated by the end of the universe. In other words, the end of the universe is a local event. Now, insofar as the end of the universe is a local event, the question arises as to its location. Where does the end of the universe occur? And this is precisely why the question of who claims, or rather where it is claimed from, that the end of the universe occurs becomes important. If it were the case that the end of the universe could be declared from after the end of the universe, then how would the claim that the end of the universe has occurred occur? There is a wonderful hypothesis put forward in a novel called The Ring by Stephen Baxter. This is wholly unrelated to any Tolkien nonsense. The Ring consists of a plan by various creatures to destroy the sun. The sun is deemed an enemy of antimatter, if you will, or photonic matter, by creatures that live in photonic matter. So they declare war on the stars. Our hero tries to survive the end of the cosmos to record it. Now, he manages to survive the end of the cosmos in order to record it precisely by making the cosmos continue. There's a wonderful passage about witnessing the calcification of the stars. They turn finally to a coal black surface and just stand a few degrees above absolute zero before all the lights go out. Is the end of the cosmos occurring? No, because it's being recorded. What then is this recording of the end of the cosmos? This is where the real bite of the question about what it is that, let's say, autonomous cultural production by cultural agents who do regard mind as the cause of the cosmos, or let's say making as the cause of the cosmos, moreover, my making as the cause of the cosmos, has bite. If I think that my making is what makes the cosmos, if, in other words, I think I am wholly autonomous with respect to all that is, i.e., if I enjoy complete independence from all that is, then and only then is it possible to claim that I produce the cosmos, that I am God or the Lord of being. This claim is at the heart of the same moralism, the same ethicism, the same claim concerning our autonomy, the autonomy of rational agents or denizens exclusively of the space of reasons, that we recognize, for example, in the late modern agenda of self-fashioning, such as propounded by Foucault. I am my own causal agent. I am the production of myself. This is Foucauldianism. It's also ethicism and physioside. Ethicism is physioside when it does not recognize dependence. Ethicism is synonymous, therefore, with evil, just because its claim is the end of nature. Right? So if this is the claim, where is it that the claim can be made from? It can only be made from in a nature. So second nature arises in the form, let's say, of a recording, a document, a social phenomenon, an aesthetic phenomenon, a cultural phenomenon, an entity of thought, an idea. And these recordings are held to be tokens of the end of that cosmos. But if they are tokens of the end of the cosmos, where is it that they occur? And here the strangest thing happens. For it's a common line with practically every philosopher of logic that logic does not inhabit the same world as logic is made of. That is to say that there is nothing natural about logic. This is to say, for example, that logic enjoys a degree of objectivity, but it does not enjoy any degree of objecthood. It's a claim to exempt logic from nature, insofar, in other words, nature is considered as a body of things, or as some megabody, or as slime, or as, let's say, the protoplasm or hyperegg at the origin of all things. One moment, please. Were there a protoplasm or hyperegg at the origin of all things, the following situation would arise. Let's consider the hyperegg. The egg which is a hyperegg precisely because it is the origin of all things. What then is the hyperegg? Which one is the hyperegg? Now the claim is it's the origin of all things. If there is a hyperegg, how then is it individuated? Since it's the origin of all things, it cannot be just one thing. If we manage to separate the hyperegg from all the things that it is claimed to be the origin of, what is this hyperegg? It is no longer the origin of all things, it is just and only the hyperegg. In other words, the hyperegg becomes a sub-egg, because even a chicken egg is the origin of some things, if not all. Yes? An ostrich egg similarly. I'm not being speciesist. So if eggs are even remotely generative, then isolating an egg, as it were, is a false image of what nature is, just if nature consists of any generation whatsoever. What's at stake in this claim? Many things. First of all, the claim that nature is generative means looking for a hyperegg, or the root cause of all things, whether it be mind, eggs, or, I don't know, the whim of some divine joker who's been hanging around doing absolutely nothing for eternities, according to St. Augustine. If that's the claim, if the universe emerges from absolutely nothing other than a claim situated nowhere in that universe, then the situation arises where no genesis occurs at all. Why? Because there is no nature prior to nature. Nature is not Genesis, it's merely the fact of creation. That is to say, the createdness of creation. Creation issues from such an act, in other words, just if creation is already finished. What is it to finish all generation? It is the end of the universe. So if the universe ends just when all generation is finished, why is this? Because all of a sudden, it turns out that powers are synonymous with their exhaustion in objects. But in this case, insofar as creation just emerges as the created, then the following instance arises. No powers have been expended. No powers have acted. Rather, all there is a split-second, peanut into the void species of universal origin. This is an extraordinary claim. It's an extraordinary claim for several reasons, not least of which is the following. If it is the case that there is a space where the universe comes to exist, where is it in the universe that that universe comes into existence? If it does, then the universe has not come into existence because the space from which it does has already come into existence. It follows, therefore, that there can be no coming into existence of the universe if that is part of the universe. If it's not part of the universe, how is it that there is any causal contact with a non-existent universe, that is to say, something that is not, entirely is not? In fact, the is-notness of all that is. or the not being of being? How is it that there is some causal contact between that state and the state in which the universe maximally and completely is? There cannot be such a contact unless it's the case that that contact consists precisely in the universe. Let me put this another way. Imagine I want to take a bus from one space, let's say a space which there is no universe yet, to another, let's say one in which there is one. What happens to the bus on its journey? I board an inexistent bus, and I'm just assuming that I'm there. Yeah? So I board an inexistent bus. This is Cartesian. I get on a bus that does not exist, and it's from that existence issues. Cogito ergo sum means I think before there is existence. So Descartes is a universal creationist, if you will, in that regard. Anyway, I get on this bus, and I have to travel somehow from a universe that does not exist to a universe that does. So what happens on this bus? The bus is, in fact, the bus of all creation. Creation occurs in that passage from inexistence to existence, and I must somehow either not have existed before getting on that bus, or it is not true that the bus is the passage from inexistence to existence, or if I have got on the bus, then it is not the passage from inexistence to existence. So what species of bus can possibly transport me from inexistence to existence? It's a nice way of thinking about it. Public transport to creation, because only if that can occur does creation occur, if there is a universe. Now let's go back, let's travel billions of years, let's say, and end at the end of all things. Let's see if we can find some solution to the situation of the claim that the end of the universe occurs. Bearing in mind that all the time I'm thinking about the positive claim that is so often made that the end of nature has already occurred. The physiocidal claim, if you were, central, if you like, central to philosophy, to art, to social practice, to ethics, to absolutely everything we associate with our being human, with our occupation of the space of reasons. Let's see if we can find, therefore, this space from which the end of the universe is announced. I announce the end of the universe. The announcement of the end of the universe has thus occurred. The statement has arisen. The end of the universe is at least prepared for. Has the end of the universe occurred? Let's say it has. Let's say, as I announce it, the universe blinks out of existence. Right? My announcement of the end of the universe is somehow magically coincident with the end of that universe. If that's the case, then where am I insofar as I'm making the claim? I am making the claim from a position of a nature after nature. That is to say, it is not the case that nature has been eliminated in the end of the universe, precisely because the only space from which it's possible to make the claim concerning the end of the universe is that universe, or a universe. Let's say it's some separate universe, some universe that has no causal or spatiotemporal contact with our own. How then is it possible that my announcement of the end of the universe can be, as it were, magically coincident with the end of the universe occurring in this other one, this actual one, let's say? If it is the case that there is coincidence, then it must be the case that there is some causal connection between those universes. If that's not the case, then no such correlation between my announcement of the end of the universe and the end of the universe itself can possibly obtain. So therefore, the announcement of the end of the universe occurs in a universe just if the universe includes its own elimination, but it includes it regionally. Now, why would anyone want to claim this? Because it is true that nature has been killed. It is true that for all our thoughts, for all our considerations of what it is that nature is, we have decided well in advance of whatever the answer to the question, what is nature, is, that it has finitude, that its finitude consists precisely in its vulnerability, if you like, to a space of reasons. Remember also that the claim that the space of reasons is fully autonomous with respect to nature falls foul of what sort of bus it is I get on to travel from the space of reasons precisely to that nature. If it's a space of reasons bus, run by the space of reasons national council, if you will, or the town council of the space of reasons, how then does it transfer to the space that is not a space of reasons, but let's say a space of nature? It cannot, as we have seen. Or if it does, then there is no true separation between the space of reasons and nature. So are we any closer to answering the question what nature is? My claim is that nature is only nature insofar as nature after nature is the only nature that there is. This means that if there is nature, and if nature is generative in any respect whatsoever, then there is no nature until it has a sequel. It's almost a Hollywood model of nature in this respect. So nothing truly exists until it has a sequel, according to Hollywood movie producers. A one-off, just einmal ist keinmal, it has not happened. So there must be a sequel. The same is true of nature. So what does this mean that nature is not? What is the species of not being that properly attaches to what nature is? First of all, its own elimination, as we have seen. So there is one space within the universe wherein the end of the universe obtains. If that weren't the case, then there is no way that the end of the universe could obtain. Right? So only one space, if you will, or certainly not all spaces, are filled, as it were, by the end of the universe. That's one species of not being. What's the other species of not being that the universe contains? We've already seen that there is an overlap, a necessary overlap, if you will, between a power and its product. If there were not, then the power and the product are identical. If the power and the product are identical, then the product just is a product without being a product. It's an eternal object. It's something that never came into existence, that always was, always will be, etc. It is, if you will, and this is fascinating, to coin a phrase from Julian Barber, who's a physicist who hates universities, which makes him a good physicist. He coined this idea that he calls Platonia. Platonia is a configuration space of the universe, he says. What does that mean? It means that the universe is made up of whatever configuration space obtains from which some configuration of the universe results. That is to say, the configuration space of the universe is never exhausted in the universe. It leads to the following question, however. Where is Platonia with respect to the universe? If Platonia is in the universe, then the configuration space of the universe from which possible universes emerge is only a configuration space if it obtains in that universe. But then it's not the configuration space of the whole universe. Or, if it remains the configuration space of the whole universe and is itself part of the universe, and this is in fact my claim, if it contains all the possible universes, but is in fact itself a part of that universe, then it follows that the configuration space of the universe is not, I'll not go by the negative route. The configuration space of the universe is precisely the issuance of innumerable universes from within the universe in which it occurs. So what accounts for this? Why is it the case that innumerable universes emerge from a configuration space of the universe? Because if that isn't the case, then the configuration space of the universe is not the configuration space of the universe. But the configuration space of the universe only is such a space if it exists in the universe. Therefore, it's a local element within the universe that consists of the multiplication of universes. In other words, nature after nature obtains just if the whole is contained in the part, not only to the higher scales, the origin of the universe, but also to the lower, which means the following. The whole is contained in the part just if the whole remains the whole, but nonetheless local within a universe within which it occurs. This is the only species of universality I can possibly think to be true. For a universal, when stated, is locally environed by the universe in which it is stated. That is to say, there is no universal that is stated, but that is not stated in some environment. Insofar as that's the case, then it follows that the environment of the universal either turns the universal, reduces it to a particular, but then the universal has not obtained, or the universal is a universal precisely and only because it is a local element within the universe by which it is environed. So what is a universal then? A universal is precisely a local function by which nature after nature is perpetuated. Now, why would it be the case that nature after nature is perpetuated? Let us consider that nature simply is. Let us consider that nature is precisely that that enormous blob, let's say the hyper-egg or the Urschleim, many examples of which we can see in the gallery, as it were. If we walk through, we shall avoid stepping on puddles of Urschleim. To do so would be to our peril, I imagine, insofar as if it genuinely is Urschleim, we'll either disappear into it and creation will be reversed, or it's not Urschleim, in which case we can happily walk over it and consider no risk to ourselves whatsoever. If it is Urschleim, however, and I think it is, then it's locally discoverable in this very gallery. In other words, protoplasm, the origin of all things, the hyper-egg, is a local element even within this gallery. Extraordinary. If this is the case, and we do have a hyper-egg which can be located as a local element within the universe, of which it is the hyper-egg, then this hyper-egg is precisely what it is, if and only if it continues to be the source of all things, the egg of all things, hence hyper-egg. So the egg of all things is an egg of all things, firstly, just if it is local, and secondly, just if it does what it says on the tin. That is to say, if it is the hyper-egg, so the origin of all things. What then is the hyper-egg? This was the problem with which we started. How do we locate or individuate the hyper-egg? We locate or individuate the hyper-egg precisely by virtue of its ubiquity. That is to say, it is everywhere. Insofar as it is everywhere, it is only then the hyper-egg. In other words, nature after nature is the precise condition under which alone the hyper-egg obtains. If it remains a hyper-egg even once it has been discovered, then and then alone is it a hyper-egg, however. So it is the origin of all things just if it is local on the one hand, and just if all things are it on the other. What does this mean? Does this mean that everything that is ultimately reducible to the hyper-egg from whence it sprang? Is this a phoenix wave of the cosmos, so to speak, so that everything returns to the ashes from whence it sprang, and from which in turn will arise a phoenix? Is it some sort of cyclical parody of nature that we find here? Or is it rather a simple fact about the locatability of any particular within a universe being required just if that locatable particular is to obtain at all? Okay, so I'm going to have a sip of water, and then I shall return to the end of the universe, which I take it to be a fitting conclusion to my paper. I'm glad the universe isn't over, because then I wouldn't be able to have a sip of water. I have had a sip of water, therefore the universe isn't over. This is excellent. Okay, so the end of the universe. I announced the end of the universe. The end of the universe obtains. It obtains just if it occurs in a universe. That universe in which it obtains is one wherein, moreover, the end of the universe must be in some sense recorded. Why? Because if it is not recorded, then there is no end of the universe. However, if the end of the universe does occur and is recorded, has the end of the universe occurred? Yes, insofar as it's a local element of that universe, but no, insofar as such an event can only happen within a universe. There are no events which cannot take place in a universe. So, the end of the universe obtains. Why? Because it obtains all the time. Why? It is ubiquitous. Why is it the case that it is ubiquitous? It is ubiquitous just because the end of the universe is consistently announced just when something arises that was not. In other words, if it's the case that there is something and that something has in any respect whatsoever come into being, this is the hyper-egg hypothesis or the Urschleim hypothesis, however you want to call it, right? If that's the case, then the end of the universe must be not merely one local element within the universe, but a ubiquitous element within the universe. The ubiquitous element that is the end of the universe obtains exactly when nature is after nature. But I have one final thing I want to say about this, and that is to go back to Plato and explore his claim that after nature, or kataphusin, according to nature, is katadunamin, that is, according or after powers. Both of these claims should be taken in both senses. That is to say, the kata, the nach, or the after, should be regarded as being both after in the sense of, let's say, following, but also after in the sense of in accordance with. So nature is nature just when it acts in accordance with powers. What then is nature not? It is not some collection of objects, nor therefore is nature some hyper-object. It is not the case, in other words, that there is any one thing that nature is. If there were, what is it that we have done? We have achieved Physioside, for a completed nature is nothing more than a nature outside which its completion stands. In other words, once I can view nature as one thing, once I can consider nature as just being one thing, then it is no longer possible, as it were, that is all that is. All of a sudden, a new space has emerged. This new space is now filled by me saying there is just one nature. But from where do I make that claim? I can only make that claim if I am environed. What is it that environs me? It is precisely nature. So insofar as nature is a thing, it is never, therefore, only a thing, but always consistently after nature. That is to say, kataphusin is katadunamen. So that's why I think the physiocidal tendency in modern thought, to call it the most general term at all, in modern culture, is false. That is why I think, for example, that John McDowell's space of reasons is not a space unless it obtains in the space whose existence, in fact, the theory of the space of reasons is premised on eliminating. What is that space? It is nature. What is it that it makes it necessary that nature be eliminated in order that the space of reasons be exactly what it is? Precisely if the space of reasons is causally responsible both for any nature that can be an inhabitant of that space of reasons, and if, therefore, the space of reasons is the fundamental determining element of what it is that makes the nature that it is. So what then is nature according to McDowell? Nature is nothing more than its own elimination as an action of a rational being. I ask you, what sort of rational being decides to eliminate nature just to make a point? Thank you very much.
So now we come to the time for questions. I'd first like to thank Iain for his very extraordinary exposition. As you might have guessed, one of his philosophical heroes is Schelling from the 19th century here in Germany. And he performed for us what Schelling called a Darstellung. So with the problem of physiocide, or what Schelling understood as what characterized the modern period of thinking in which we still are, characterized the modern period as constitutive of the inability to think the question of nature. And so within the terms of that modern period, Schelling then would use rein rationale Philosophie to bring reason itself back to its own limit, such that also at that moment, nature itself would flash before our eyes. So to really demonstrate the presence of nature precisely by rationally analyzing rationality's own allergy to nature. So I think, and it's also performative. So at the end of Iain's analysis of physiocide, voila, there it is, nature after nature. I've missed you. So now Iain will take all of your very exciting questions.
Thank you for your inspiring lecture. I think most of the time you talked about mainly external nature, that is, nature and environment around us. Here, I'd like to add two dimensions to your opinion. The first is the opinion from present German philosopher Gernot Böhme. According to the opinion of Böhme, our own body is also a nature. That is, our body has natural qualities. For example, our feeling, our emotion, our imagine, and our perception reacted to the environment in a natural way. That's a dimension. The second dimension comes from the classical Chinese philosophy of, namely Taoismus. According to Taoismus, the origin and the development of the world follows in the natural way, follows the natural principle. So I want to point out that in both cases, there is no question about the first nature and the second nature. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Thank you very much for your question. To take them in reverse order, insofar as nature follows according to Taoism from a simple, from nature's simple being, insofar as that following actually obtains, then I have absolute sympathy with that view. But vis-a-vis the claim about bodies and so forth, I think we fall victim to two species of error in regarding bodies as the sole locus of what nature is. I'm going to address both of them in turn. The first one consists in scientism or naturalism, such that the only kinds of things that exist are bodies. So the kinds of events you talked about, perceptions, affects, emotions, what have you, those sorts of things don't really exist according to the naturalist. According to our natural sciences, those things will only exist once they have been translated into the proper language by means of which the brain does not communicate at all with anything other than its own neuroelectrical processes. And insofar as that, let's say, physiological narcissism of the brain is realized in the naturalist program, then all of a sudden the naturalist has given rise to a domain filled with entities that do not exist. What sort of a domain is that? And what sort of a naturalist sets about as her agenda to eliminate from nature many things which actually obtain within it? So that's one. The other thing is, if we think that nature consists in bodies and in bodies alone, there are many ways in which that is quite simply a reductive account. I'd like to add a third thing, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Is a reductive account in the following way. If there are only bodies, how do they move? Are they moved simply by virtue of some interior force, or are they moved by virtue of some exterior force? If they're moved by a force, whether interior or exterior, there are not only bodies. Or are bodies just the sorts of things that move? Insofar as bodies are just the sorts of things that move, then it follows that a body is not reducibly a body, since it is also, at the very least, some sort of force. Moreover, what is a force by virtue of? By being finite with respect to other forces. So a body is more or less equivalent, whether our bodies or the bodies of planets or chairs or what have you, is more or less equivalent to the surface tension on a soap bubble. I think probably our own bodies are more interest to us than soap bubbles, but that's for entirely local reasons. So you can imagine, if you will, that a universe consisting entirely of bodies would consist eternally and only of bodies that do not move. It's simply a static chessboard universe, unless there is some principle of movement, and if there is a principle of movement, then that principle of movement means that the universe does not simply consist in bodies. And the third thing really I wanted to say, which I mentioned en route, so I haven't flagged this up sufficiently, but I'll go ahead anyway, I'll exploit my position, as it were. Consists of the basic narcissistic humanist prejudice by means of which Physioside becomes a realizable prospect. Yes? So we like to think that because there are emotions, first of all, there are natural sciences which want to deny they exist. So in order to safeguard emotions, we too have to murder nature just because we are convinced that natural science does in fact deliver to us exactly and only what nature is, and somehow therefore want to hang on to a human nature which is separate from that. But no such nature can obtain unless exactly the same nature in which the natural sciences operate, in which reason operates, is exactly the same nature in which there are hypotheses, or there are emotions, or there are affects, or there are artworks. It's exactly that. So in other words, the claim is not really that the species of nature that I'm advocating is one that is eliminative. It is properly inflationary just precisely because there is no universe that does not contain the sorts of things that the universe, if it obtains, does in fact contain. Amongst them, so why do we need a body to hang that on? I think it's merely it's a shield, as it were, a narcissistic, anthropic shield by means of which we protect ourselves from the nature that we have eliminated in order to constitute that relation.
Hello. So I missed maybe something like the first 5 or 10 minutes from the presentation. And thank you, it was wonderful as always. So maybe I'm not very entitled to this, but I'll ask it anyway. I'm trying to understand this concept of a local end of nature, which is beautiful and brilliant. Is it some kind of, I don't know, local actualization by exhaustion of powers? If yes, then is it teleological in any sense? Is it in some sense antecedent to the nature which it puts an end to? Is there any element of Platonism to this then? And maybe, but this bit of my own question I don't very well understand. Is it some species of abstraction? Because right now I'm trying to figure out what abstraction is for Schelling, and natural abstraction, any other kind of abstraction. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for the question and for your compliments. My claim is that the end of the universe is an element of the universe, and therefore that the universe is non-final. So the question would be, how far does that non-finality extend? We can understand it in two ways. One in the sequenced obtaining of which comes first, the end or the beginning. Or we can understand it in the manner of Platonia, as Barbara suggested. That is to say, it's part of the configuration space of the universe that there obtains within it an end of the universe. But that end of the universe obtains only in a universe. So in that respect, the end of the universe both does and does not obtain. Yes? So that's crucial. And I think that is in part an answer to the question also about abstraction. But I'll come back to that in a moment. The question about finality or teleology, or what sort of process is this? Is there a beginning and an end such that there is just a march from the one to the other? Such that in the end, all that matters is the beginning or the end? The beginning and the end, rather. Or is it the case that, let's imagine, for example, that there are no species of development that are in themselves final? If that's the case, and I like to cite in my support here, evolutionary developmental biology, or Evo-Devo, as it's gloriously and terribly badly called. For those of you old enough, there was a diabolical American punk band called Devo, and the idea that they've returned in the science of biology is just despicable. In any case, Evo-Devo precisely hypothesizes non-finality at the level of process and non-finality at the level of form. That is to say, no form consists in the final state, or the adult state, if you will, of an organism. Why? Because the organism is only locatable within an envelope of development. But if that envelope of development is non-final, what then is that organism? The organism is a local sum of non-final processes. So what do they mean by that? They mean precisely that, for example, the processes that give rise to brains are also the processes that give rise to kidneys, are also the processes that give rise to aspirins, and so on and so forth. I don't know why I thought of kidneys and aspirins at the same time. I'm presumably anxious about the state of my health after the last few nights in Kassel. But let's accept the hypothesis. What does this non-finality entails? That there is no process that reaches a conclusion in its object, in its product, because there are no products which are final with respect to the process. That means that the non-finality attaching to the universe as such is a non-finality realized locally within it, consistently and, if you like, repeatably. So the abstraction question then is an abstraction question just if we regard the removal of the logic from the context in which it arises as being in some sense either final, there is a finished form, there is a species of a complete diagram of operations, if you will, and therefore is not itself an expression of the universe that contextualizes precisely that logic and within which therefore it is merely a local event, while at the same time that logic does exactly what it says it does, which is to say, for example, laws of universality, laws of contradiction, and so forth. So the abstraction question is only a question of abstraction if, in other words, we can realize the complete separation of, let me call it a space of reasons, from a space, let me call it a space of nature, which, as I've shown, is precisely Physioside. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you can imagine, there are so many things that I totally agree with. Here's a question that always arises to me in similar contexts, and that I will raise later, so I hope that I will get an answer in advance so that I can advance with my own talk beyond my own problem. So let's say that your argument establishes the irreducibility of a number of phenomena. Okay, so you extend nature, the concept of nature, in your terms, nature after nature, and you don't want to call this naturalism for all the reasons that you have given, and I can see why this is a good move. But now I'm wondering what you would do with certain phenomena that really look like we should ontologically reduce them. My favorite example right now is puberty. There are two ways of looking at puberty. One is to say that, yeah, this awful child getting on my nerves at breakfast, blah, blah, blah. If you're a parent, what do I do with a 14-year-old constantly smoking pot and blah, blah. What do I do with this? And then maybe you start yelling at that person and you look into psychoanalytical treatment and so forth, until you find out that puberty is really just hormone change. So puberty can be reduced to hormone change, and it's even the right way of looking at it. So if you look at puberty as an element in the space of reasons, you're utterly misguided about puberty. So there are some cases where I think that the kind of reduction that the overgeneralizing reductive naturalist just overextends, to use your language, I think last year you used overextend. Yeah. So overextension is the problem, but maybe the problem doesn't lie in the operation. So maybe there's a possible conceptual separation between overextension, which leads to naturalism, and ontological reduction, which locally can sometimes be performed. And then, but if you agree to that, then there is a legitimate worry as to how far we could possibly reduce mental phenomena in general. So if puberty can be reduced, then you might wonder what other things might be reduced along the same lines. So this is where would you draw the line? Is there a principled line, or is it just a matter of fact that puberty can be so reduced, but this is no evidence to the effect that all mental phenomena could be reduced? Where do you stand on this one, on the puberty issue?
Yep. Thank you, Markus. You want me to get past puberty, or to help you get past puberty? I'm not quite sure which.
No, please help me.
Okay, I actually thought I'd done with this, but okay, you pose a problem in terms of, let's say, the proper understanding of, and we can use other examples. Let's say some illness, is shall we say chemical or surgical and so forth, and that therefore this warrants a species of reduction in one instance. Yeah, a local reduction, but. Does it? My question arises from the following context. Is this a genuine species of reduction, or is it precisely a species of extraction? So this is why I'm thinking about it surgically, as it were. If there is a reason why let's say a genetic account of cancer or a chemical account of puberty and so on and so forth are the correct accounts, that correct account is epistemically realized by reduction, but not ontologically. That is to say, the ontological conditions for the instantiation either of puberty or of cancer obtain just when there are bodies and just when the additional symptoms that may be reduced epistemically, as it were, to provide a means of intervening, are not themselves reduced. So I think the confusion between the ontological register and the epistemic one is precisely the basis of my objection to naturalism as insisting on reduction being an epistemic means, which it clearly is. Otherwise, we don't know anything until we repeat the entire contents of the universe, at which point the repetition of the entire contents of the universe must be part of either the contents of that universe or the universe has just got infinitely larger. So clearly we need reduction epistemically, but to confuse that with ontology is just false on the following grounds. That precisely the symptoms that obtain when these chemical operations obtain are precisely those symptoms, and no amount of epistemic reduction is going to get rid of them. In other words, unless the epistemic understanding intervenes in the situation, unless the epistemic reduction rather intervenes in the situation, then those symptoms are maintained, in which case the reduction has not helped. So reduction is not a good word, I think. I think rather it's a species of extraction, and it's extraction from a context that precisely locally occurs within a cosmos. But that does not mean that the extraction entails, it's the elimination, as it were, of the relation between the environment from which it's been abstracted and or extracted rather, and the extracted phenomenon itself. Neither does it mean that either doesn't share, as it were, full ontological rights. No. So I should stop generating spots now, I think, and so forth.